Kia ora everybody. Annette Bray and I are doing a few short little clips to encourage us in our spiritual growth, to set up some good habits so that as we begin this new year, we are setting ourselves up to be in places where we're going to be able to grow spiritually. And we're going to be focusing on one approach to how we might read scripture. So first of all, hello Annette, thank you for joining me again this morning.
You're welcome.
I'm a little excited but also a little nervous about this one because we are going to actually work through an exercise. You want to just explain just very briefly a summary of what this exercise is?
Is a process of having a look at a passage of scripture. It can be quite a long one or a short one, but more than one verse, where we intentionally read it over and over again. We might read it 3 or 4 times, slowly, quickly, out loud, in different ways. And then as we think about the scripture, we look at it and see the questions that might come from the scripture, because sometimes when we read it quickly, we don't actually think about, well, how did this happen, or how did that happen, or why was that there, or why wasn't it there, or how does this belong in this passage? We talk to God about it. We talk to God in scripture, in prayer, and in the scripture we might find things that we think, well, I wonder if I can find the answer to my question about that particular space. And then just listen to God. And if you don't get an answer, you've got to be okay with that too.
Yeah, it's because sometimes we just don't get the answers. So that's actually the nature of faith. So the reason I'm a little excited and maybe a little nervous about doing this particular exercise is because you and I have not rehearsed how this is going to go, and we are going to work through an exercise. Now, we're going to skip some bits because when you're doing this in real time, it might take half an hour or an hour, or I guess it's going to take more than just a quick whip through. So you do want to allow some time. You don't want to feel rushed. You want to be able to give it that time. So I have already read the passage, and the passage that you've given me to read is Matthew 8:23 through 27, which is Jesus calming the waves. If people don't know that passage, I'll suggest that they pause this right now, go away and have a read, and maybe they want to do what I have already done and read it through 3 or 4 times. I like to read it through out loud. I think that's really helpful. And like you said, you can read it quickly, you can read it slowly. When you read it out loud, I think you can often add expression to it, because when we're just kind of reading it, it's not quite as dynamic. So pause now if you're not familiar with that passage, and then we'll come back.
So then the next step is to have a look through it, and you could do, if you have been able to print it up or if you've got it on a screen, is perhaps circle bits that don't make sense, or things that you want to ask of the scripture. And so for me, I've got it printed up on a piece of paper, and I've got, then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake. So as soon as they got into the boat, did the storm start? That's the question I'm asking the scripture. Or was it, how long did it take? Because it says furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. So did Jesus get into the boat and immediately fall asleep? I wish I could do that.
That's exactly what I thought there too. Imagine me having to sleep through all of that. Gosh.
Yeah. Did he step onto the boat, lay down and fall straight asleep, or did they take a meal first, or did they get away from And so I'm asking these questions about, and it helps to build a picture in my mind of actually what could it have looked like. If you're a person who thinks in pictures, this is a really good exercise. Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him and said, "Lord, save us." And then a little while later, when the calm has come, the men were amazed. Well, why did they wake him up and say, "Lord, save us," if they didn't believe he could calm the waters? So then why were they amazed? So these are the types of questions that we ask of Scripture when we're looking closely at it, when we read it over and over. We're seeing the paradox between asking him to save them and then being amazed that he did.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Shall I tell you some of the things that stood out to me? We see, I think, a real contrast between the human Jesus and the divine Jesus in this, because why is he sleeping? Well, you sleep because you're tired and you need a rest. And and if he is that tired that he just goes straight to sleep and can sleep through a storm, he's going to be exhausted. And when you read the scriptures of how busy he was and the demands on Jesus, just going from one place to another, couldn't even get to another place without people interrupting him on the way because they needed something of him. I see this as him being just very human, and yet that question at the end that the disciples ask, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and waves about him. Yeah, he's a man, but he's clearly not just any kind of man. So this divine being who can just speak, and it's instant calm, the contrast between that and these waves that are so big that they are going over the boat. This isn't just sitting in the boat and it's a little bit wobbly and you're up and down. The waves are surrounding the boat, and it goes from that to complete calm. An excellent question, I thought the disciples asked. What kind of man is this? And in a sense, that's the ultimate question that we all have to ask, isn't it? About, well, who do we think Jesus is, and how do we make sense of this?
I think for me, one of the things is that, so when they get in the boat, it was obviously reasonably calm, and these things have happened suddenly. So suddenly a furious storm came up, and then he got up, rebuked the winds, and it was completely calm. For those of us who have ever been in a boat, we know that doesn't happen. We know that for a storm, when a storm is coming, you can see the beginnings of the storm happening, and it happens over a period of time. It doesn't just storm, not storm. Whereas it says it was completely calm. And so I think it also speaks to the fact that Jesus, our God, is the God of the impossible, because we know that it's impossible to go from calm to furious storm to calm in instants. We know that it takes time to build up to a storm, and we know it takes time to build towards calm. And but for Jesus, what we see as impossible to happen is actually instantly possible.
Jesus asking the disciples, why are you so afraid? On the surface of that, that's a really stupid question. They thought they were going to die. Who wouldn't be afraid? But it is actually a good question. What actually were they afraid of?
My only other question of the scripture was, he rebuked the winds. I wonder what the words were. What were the words he actually spoke? And we'll never know. We'll never know.
No, but whatever it was, they listened. Was it that they listened because of the words he spoke, or because of the person that he was?
Yeah, exactly.
So we've had a great discussion of that already, and that is just off the top of our heads from the things that have jumped off the page. We would just suggest that the next step is to go.
I think you might have written some stuff down in a journal. You might have just noted stuff as you went along. The next thing is to go to God, is to go to God in prayer and say, look, I'm really, if there was something you really didn't understand, I'm struggling with this. What does this mean? And God may speak to you. God might point you in another direction. And as you sit and contemplate, ideas will come to your mind. Then again, if it's an answer to a specific question, I don't know, what body of water was the boat on? Then you can go further into scripture, or you can go into a commentary book and read about some of the stuff that happened beforehand and some of the stuff that happened afterwards, and you'd be able to understand where geographically they were. And then at the same time, maybe do some research about, okay, so if it was on a particular body of water, what are the characteristics of that body of water? Why would a storm come up really quickly?
I want to do further research into Lord save us, because that's a phrase that I've heard a lot of times in the Bible and other places, and I wonder what people meant by it. And I think there are lots of places throughout the Bible where it actually can mean something. It can mean something political. It can mean a lot of different things. So I thought that's where a commentary or something could be really useful as well, is to dig into those words. So there are all kinds of things that I just simply might not know, and I need to go to a scholar and get some information, and that would help me further. And I guess the place that we want to end, though, is having done that research, having done that thinking and giving it time, that we want to just come back to the so what question. So what if Jesus is that divine human being that speaks and storms obey him? What if there is something about salvation and God save us that I haven't understood? So what if I now know these interesting things and do nothing with it? So what is the next step? And I guess that's where we need to be open to God to say, well, what does this mean to my life? How do I apply it?
It is really important, because if we don't do anything, we can read Scripture and be unchanged. It could just be as easy as being reassured of God's love, that actually reminds us that we're not alone and that God is for us, reminding us that the salvation is not just for what we see in the Bible, it's for us personally.
That's cool. So when we talk about the so what and the application of the Scripture, it might be that it requires us to do something, but it actually just might be that we now know something, that we have now seen something in a different way, that there's some reassurance that we need, that we just have a deeper understanding of God. Thank you so much for taking me through that exercise. That is fascinating, just what's come out in that conversation, and I really would like to encourage those listening to give it a go. Maybe do your own exercise on that same particular passage, but maybe just going to another passage, and particularly out of a gospel like Mark, where it tends to be in short chunks, that could be a really good place to start. Take a few verses, read it slowly, ask the questions, do some thinking, do some research, and see what God is saying to you.